Hey, thanks for watching. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. If you want me to play your deck on stream, feel free to reach out. Contact information in the description below. Also, I stream Legacy live almost every day at twitch.tv/Untitled, so come by and say hi. It's time for some Magic. Let's get to it.
All right, and we're back. So, some slight difficulties or whatever. So we're actually slightly switching up the feature match. So we are still getting Elves. So we're getting Hello Newton, one of the better Elves players, one I respect a lot. And they're going to be playing against Reanimator this round in the hands of Maxime. And so this is an interesting matchup. So Elves we kind of talked about before our break as just being a very... Okay, darn it. I was hoping I'd win the coin flip. All right, but...
It's okay, we can talk about Reanimator first.
Yeah, we'll talk about Reanimator first. So, basic shell is always the same. I'm trying to get things in the graveyard and reanimate. But what's different about this list and what it's trying to accomplish?
Yep, so this is one of the many archetypes that had a few additions from Modern Horizons 2. We can see Grief here complementing the Unmasks. We're seeing a 4-2 split because Grief can't target yourself, which is definitely a line that Reanimator likes to do sometimes, is just target themselves with a discard spell, put a fatty in the yard, and then bring it back. But Grief is certainly an extra piece of interaction to help strip a Forcible out of the opponent's hand or a graveyard hate card, and it also serves as a potential reanimation target. So I think it raises the consistency of your deck where, if you have Grief plus no ways to bring a fatty in the yard, you can just use your reanimate to bring back a 3/2 that discards a card from the opponent's hand. That's perfectly reasonable. And then you also see a few big creatures themselves from Modern Horizons 2 as the kind of flex blot. So we're seeing Archon of Cruelty, which is a 6/6 that when it enters or attacks, the opponent sacks a card, or sacks a creature or planeswalker, loses 3 life, and discards a card, and you gain 3 life and draw a card. So, kind of getting you ahead on all accesses there. Life total, field, and cards in hand. And then we also have Sarah's Emissary, which, when it comes into play, I believe you choose a card type, and you and creatures you control have protection from that card type. So, if your opponent has something you can't quite deal with, maybe like a bunch of creatures blocking you, or, some sort of enchantments that are, funny, can be like a nice little silver bullet to get around that sort of thing.
Yeah, so what's pretty cool about Reanimator, sometimes you've seen like the main deck Iona or like a lot of legendary cards because those were just the best things to be doing. But the problem is that's not great against Karakas, and we've been seeing quite a few Karakas in these Uro decks, or even just lands and what have you. So now it's just, okay, Gristlebrand is the only legend I'll play, because even if you Karakas that, I can maybe do something else that turn also. But before it was just kind of like maybe a Tidespout Tyrant and some Chancellor of the Annex, but these are real haymakers that you can tutor for with Entomb, so pretty interesting stuff. And then if we could switch over to the Elves deck list, nice. So yeah, Elves has picked up a few tools over the last few years. We've seen Newton be a fan of playing Archon, but yeah, can you walk me through this list?
Yep. So Elves is one of the oldest and boldest tribal decks. The main goal is to play a bunch of Elves and use them for synergy, for fun and profit. One of the main ways that you win, there's 2 main ways to win. One is Glimpse of Nature, which is a 1-mana sorcery that when you cast a creature spell, you draw a card, and you combine that with your Elves that tap for mana to play Elves, tap them for mana, play more Elves, draw more cards, etc. And the other way is Natural Order, which 4-mana sorcery, you sack a green creature and you search your library for a green creature and just put it into play. So usually you're going to build up a board, cast Natural Order, and then get Crater Hoof Behemoth, which pumps all your team, and I believe gives them trample as well. So you're swinging for tons of damage. Like you said, there have been a few new additions somewhat recently. I think Alistair Shepherd is a couple years old at this point.
Maybe one?
Maybe 1, maybe 1.5. Yeah, it's going on 2. Yeah. But it was definitely a boon to the Elves deck, making itself is uncounterable, and then all your green spells are uncounterable. So it's a really good card against the blue decks that are so popular in the format. And then it also has an activated ability for 6 mana. You can turn your Elves into 5/5s for a turn, and so it's a win con in its own right as well.
And yeah, looks like we're gonna go down to the match, so we'll see if we can have some interesting dynamics, like that one of Endurance in the opening.
I did notice that in the deck tech. I didn't have time to bring it up, but it's in the opener. So,
Yeah. So it looks like Reanimator's on the play here. Has, some mana sources discard spell, Entomb, Reanimate, or a reanimation card. So how do you feel about these openers?
yeah, so I think that the hands with Reanimator that are easy to keep are really easy, and the ones where it's like close are really hard.
Mhm.
This one to me looks like a slam dunk. Like you mentioned, you have a way to put a thing in the yard, and you have a way to bring it back, and some fast mana as well. And that's kind of everything you're hoping for. In addition to this Chancellor of the NX, which I think it's more useful against like the forceful decks, but I think it will certainly do a good job of slowing elves down here potentially as well.
Yeah, so one interesting dynamic is like if they land go and are you gonna go for it? Are you just gonna, play around the one of endurance?
One theory coming into play here. You just you
You
can't really
could
play
wait
around
a
the one of.
you could wait a turn to Thoughtseize, like you slowed them down a little with the Chancellor, but you chose to land go to like play the Entomb, so it seems like we might just shove here.
Yeah. Um, Newton deciding to play into the Chancellor and just discard a card to it. I think that this is kind of nice because it is something he would do if he didn't have the endurance in hand, and so
Mhm.
it's a way to help kind of disguise what he's working with.
Yeah, so Gristlebrand entering the graveyard. We see what the draw. Another Chancellor. So pretty good in the first 7, not good in the first 8.
Yeah, the eighth card Chancellor is certainly not what you want. Although if it was in the opener, obviously it wouldn't have made a difference in this game in particular. But it's just not a good card to top deck.
A pretty big blowout here, so just the endurance taking it all away. But for Maxime, at least if they draw, say, a reanimate, you can Thoughtseize yourself, discard the emissary, and then be able to reanimate it. So still some play to it, but the plan A just going out the window against the one of just doesn't feel particularly great, but it's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, that certainly is how it goes sometimes. And I'm sorry, I didn't get to see lands in the list. Do we know if Newton has a main board Bajuka Bog, or is that more of a sideboard?
It's actually a main board Bajuka Bog. I can speak. Bajuka
It's
Bog. So
okay.
yes,
Yeah,
so leaving up the reclama like
Reclaimer.
yeah,
Yeah,
Elvish, yeah, Elvish Reclaimer. It's hard. They're all like the same words.
there's so many
Um,
names. We're talking so fast. It's totally
s-
defensible.
so you can actually hope that they draw the Bajuka Bog. That way they can't tutor her for it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
the
that
natty
is
bog sometimes giveth and sometimes taketh away.
yeah.
And so yeah, I think that we're gonna see, Newton just hold up that interaction. There's no real risk or there's no real, you know, pressure under him to attack with the reclaimer, even if it's a 1-2 right now, but even if it does become a 3-4, you're gonna win the game if the opponent can't reanimate a big spell. So there's
Mhm.
no real reason to, incur that risk. Because like you said, the reanimated opponent is perfectly capable of going off in a single turn, given the right cards in hand.
Right, and you're able to get more Dryad Arbors here, so then your Cradle makes even more mana, and then once you just have so much mana, like it doesn't matter that you're almost like pseudo-sacrificing this like Reclaimer plus 2 mana every turn to just leave up your ability to find Bajuka Bog if you have other things that are pressuring your opponent.
Yeah, completely agree. Newton, knows what's important in the matchup, and he's in a position where he's ahead, and so he's going to maximize or minimize the chance that he loses the game, as opposed to taking needless risks.
Well, one thing that is important to note, though, is in a very large subset of the games, like Maxime would already be sideboarding and playing game 2, right? Like they would have already won. So even though this game is like, oh man, like Elves is so far ahead and stuff like that, it's like it's just the world we happen to live in. But there were just so many worlds where Maxime would have already won the game.
Yes, yeah, we didn't talk about who we felt was favored before the game started.
Mhm.
I was going to, say that Reanimator is certainly the favorite in game one, and then post board, depending on how much graveyard hate the Elves player has, that can affect things. Um, so I would expect probably like 90% ish plus of the time for Reanimator to have taken game one. But hey, that's why you play one ofs in your deck sometimes,
Well,
especially. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna make a joke that, one thing you learn over time as a commentator is that you can actually predict the future. It just happens. So I already knew this was gonna happen, so I saved you from making that sort of prediction. So
Yeah, thank you for saving me from myself. I do appreciate that. Um, but yeah, and especially a card like Endurance, which is just, it shines against graveyard decks as as your mana hate piece. but it is just like an all-around solid card. It blocks Delver, it can shuffle Uros back into the graveyard, and so
Mhm.
there's a lot of decks in the format where it has game against.
Yeah, it's still fine in your green Zenith deck to be able to tutor it paying 4 mana.
Exactly, yeah. We saw, or I guess we didn't go over the metagame, but lands was a popular choice for this weekend.
Mhm.
It's good against them as well, shuffling away either the cards that Loam is targeting or Loam itself after got some lands back. So I really like the
So
inclusion.
so Animate Dead on the Endurance actually stops the 1/1 assault for a little.
It's huge.
Um,
Yeah, giving the -1/-0 instead of -1/-1 that we probably would see nowadays with modern card design sensibilities. Um,
so if we just draw a few more Lotus Petals and then just cast our Emissary. I don't know if Nguyen actually has an answer to Sarah's Emissary if you name creature.
yeah, other than going
Or
wide,
Grist.
I think you're
Would it be
right.
Grist? Because
Yeah, Grist would work because it
it
is
becomes a
Planeswalker when it's
Planeswalker?
targeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot
And
of definitely interesting rules interactions with, when it's a creature, when it's a planeswalker. You can't force a negation in it because it's a creature on the stack. You can green some zenith it's a creature in your deck.
yeah,
It
it's like
is actually.
it's
Oh,
just
sorry.
like Schrodinger's Planeswalker or something.
Yeah, just it's funny because most of the time the interactions like edge in favor of the Grist player, where I think it's a really good addition to Elves in particular because you play a lot of fodder for it, but also it helps you get around Containment Priest because um, it enters the battlefield as a planeswalker, and so Containment Priest doesn't stop it, and so
Oh wow. So,
you're
so
not
you can
winning.
you can green sun for it, but like you still get it.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not winning the game with natural order, but the difference between getting nothing and getting a 3 mana planeswalker that can put up blockers or kill the containment priest, that's a huge upgrade to the deck for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, so it makes sense we see it as a 1-up in the deck list.
Hmm.
So from New Inside, you saw them burn a Glimpse of Nature, just trying to find some small chain. Like if you find a symbiote off of that Heritage Druid, then you get a bunch more cards. But really thinning the deck out with this Reclaimer, and still no rush. It's like if I leave this open and don't draw Bajuka Bog, everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think drawing the Natty Bog would certainly not be ideal, but you have so many more good cards to draw to that thinning of the deck makes it worth it. And we see Newton does finally pick up the natural order. Um, finds, I'm imagining he's going to find the Crater Hoof. He does,
Yeah.
and then he's going to swing for way more than lethal. Sorry, endurance. You have 4 toughness is a lot, but +6/+6 and trample is a lot more to your whole team.
The Reanimator sideboard has some Wear Tear, Show and Tell, Massacre, Silence, Echoing Truth. So what are you thinking about when Newton has, those types of tools at their disposal?
Yeah, so I think that one interesting thing we see here is that this Reanimator player is splashing blue for show and tell, which is not completely uncommon. We've certainly seen that trick in the past, and it will certainly come into play here against the Leyline of the Void and stuff like that. I think even though this is open deck list and Newton will know about the show and tells and can assume that they might come in, uh, you probably still just have to play your game plan and hope to draw a ley line and either hope Thoughtseize can break that sort of thing up and, that your draw
There's,
lines up correctly.
right, so there's the Show and Tell you were talking about in the pregame or in the sideboarding portion. So, but you don't have a fatty. You have a reanimation spell. You have a looting. So do you just say looting? I hope you're good enough.
Um, that is a close one. The hand, like you said, is so good. It's only missing a fatty. I personally would be tempted to keep because worst comes to worst, turn 2 you can exhume and get back the grist, and you have some board presence. Plus, you are potentially taking a good card of the opponent's hand, and also against post board where there's all this graveyard hate. Even if you draw the nut turn 1 reanimator hand, you might not get it off anyway. And here we see that Newton does put in the Leyland of the Void, so I like to keep here.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's very interesting. So, like, your hand is actually dynamic enough by having the Faithless Looting, where you can play around the Graveyard Hate and have the Show and Tell, so you can just keep the Fat in your hand. Maybe even just plan to hardcast the Grief and, like, do other things along the way.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. Newton did mulligan to 5 and has this Leyland, so it's like I imagine these sorts of games are going to be very scrappy, where both players aren't exactly doing what their deck is built to do like well and consistently because they're more focused on stopping what the opponent is doing, either finding answers to the ley line or um, just mulliganing to the ley line.
So super heads up play. So you could wait a turn to evoke the grief next turn. That way, when you show and tell, you get access to seeing one more card. But there's also some, turn two plays that might be menacing enough that your opponent mulligan down to 5. They start with the ley line, like you said. They just don't have many resources. So that's a key development turn as well. So I like that decision to do a turn. Like with me being able to see both sides, I like doing it that turn. But being able to do that without knowing the opponent's hand, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I like it too. It's unlikely, especially against show and tell, that Newton would be able to draw something to disrupt it. In particular, there's no counter magic. There's no,
Mhm.
stuff like that. So you just want to see if they have a thought seize or anything like that. And in this particular hand, nabbing the grist was very important because it is a creature in hand. You can put it into play off show and tell, and then untap and minus it to kill the Archon. So really nice that he was able to snipe that out of the hand.
Yeah, to be fair, it does come with a cost. The cost is that draw step. If it ends up being, I don't know, like uh, maybe a Crater Hoof or an like
Yes, that's
Archon or
true. Yeah, if they
something,
draw
that's
something really
something
good.
great. But you're like stymieing development that turn. So I do like the decision, but it's not free.
I agree. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that people love about Magic is that, there's very rarely a play that's just like always going to be better than the other play or the other option you have available to you. There's a
Mhm.
lot of risk reward in certain different decisions, and so balancing uh, that is can be rewarding.
So the Archon just stripping the hand, drawing a animate dead. So you can actually animate dead your opponent's creatures, but that's going to be getting nabbed by the Thoughtseize. So it's kind of these little critters that are going to be sent to the yard soon against the baby cruel ultimatum dragon. So we'll see how this goes.
Yep, absolutely. We see the show and tell Juke, coming in huge here. With no answer to the ley line in hand. Um, it would have been tough for Maxim to get around that without show and tell. But this
That's a
Archon is
draw.
just yeah, this Archon's going to take over the game really quickly. With Newton on no cards in hand and having to sacrifice a creature every turn, and also being at 6 life.
And this Crystal Brand's going to enter the battlefield as well.
Yeah, I didn't mention it because it almost doesn't matter. But if there was a 1% chance, there's less than that now.
Yeah, so we're going to go to the sideboard for game 3. So Newton's going to be on the play here. So we saw some sideboard action there. So like you mentioned, the show and tell just coming up huge there, especially because most of the interaction minus Grist is going to involve the graveyard. Um, so yeah, do you change anything for? Oh, okay. So now that you're Newton and you're on the play, do you want to bring in thought seizes? Like the problem is if you kind of board in too many reactive cards to try to like address the plan, you can still get juked by like the show and tell, but you might not be able to put enough pressure down to actually matter.
Yeah, it's close because as we saw, it's not like Maxim is cutting the entire graveyard aspect of their deck. They still have the Faithful Suitings, they still have the Entombs. So it's gonna be difficult to say, well, oh, do I not want this, Leyline because they could have the show and tell plan. I think the answer to that is no. I think you guys need to, board in what you boarded in, your relevant interaction, and kind of hope it lines up the right way.
Yeah, so just the real haymakers that
Yeah.
really affect the matchup in a huge way, but otherwise you just gotta get them dead too.
hmm Exactly. Because
That makes
the
sense.
thing is, even if you only have like some board pressure, Crater Hoof does kill with not too much of a board. You only really need like 2 or 3 other creatures to
Hmm.
to get him dead with that sort of thing. And if you are stopping them from getting a big thing to play, either through Leyline or through Thoughtseize, through the presence of a Grist on the board, kind of threatening to kill whatever they put into play, you don't really need that much else going on.
So we do see the thought seizes came in, and we see a bunch of ley lines.
Yeah, this
So
one's an interesting one.
yeah, so this one. So one thing that I do love about the elves deck is your fetch lands are creatures, and other than a hardcast massacre, you don't really have to worry about them dying in any normal way. So you can present quite a bit of pressure. So you can thought seize, and then you can play another Thoughtseize if you need to, and you have this ley line, and man, it just seems like one of the best hands Newton can have, other than the second ley line.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, like you mentioned in sideboarding, it is certainly not a hand that applies too much pressure, but it seems crazy to me to even think about mulliganing a double ley line, double Thoughtseize opener. Your deck is full of, elves. You're gonna draw the elves, and Newton does just have to keep.
You gotta feel bad as Maxime. Just you had two wear tears in your hand. You could have gotten rid of all of them, but now you're left with this one. You're gonna get Thoughtseize, and then you're gonna get stuck with the wear tears, so you can mulligan to 5.
Yeah, I have often thought about how Magic would be different in these sorts of games if you had to show your pregame effects before mulliganing,
Mm.
like before making mulligan decisions. But I think it could help as much as it could hurt as far as reanimator players, because you do have the Chancellor trigger, so it can help to know if you're supposed to keep, because you can't beat a Chancellor trigger. But it also helps the reanimator player where it's like, oh, my opponent had ley line, okay, I'll just mulligan to a wear tear hand.
Or
So it cuts both. Yeah, it cuts both ways. Yeah.
Yep. It's just the reality. Whatever we have is the reality we live in right now. So
That too. Yeah, it can be fun to think about what ifs, but it's also not that useful a lot of the time.
So I think what we need is we need Reanimator to have the Jonathan Sakenic tech from Pioneer of we need to be able to entomb for 1 Eternal Scourge against these Ley Line of the Voids. Then we can start beating down.
Yeah, how does the Elves deck ever beat a 3/3? I think
just can't.
Is what you're getting at.
It's literally just 1/1s.
All their cards are 1/1s. They don't do synergy stuff. They don't draw cards. They don't, curve into Crater Hoof. So I like this thought process of yours, and I think that you are going to revolutionize the meta potentially.
Yeah. You guys better be happy that Anurak keeps on sticking me in the booth, because I just take all your money. I'd just be in first every time.
True.
But here I am. So from Maxime's side, like, how do you win this game? I guess it's just like going to turn 7 or something in a lot of scenarios and hoping that you're just still alive because it's 1/1s.
Yeah, I mean, Maxim is certainly behind here. They don't have really much of anything going on. But then again, like we pointed out, Newton doesn't have much pressure. Like you said, the Foothills could turn into a Dryad Arbor next turn. But I think it's going to be drawing Show and Tell again. Potentially drawing another copy of Wear Tear. But it's going to have to be running good draws, either Show and Tell plus creature, or another Wear Tear plus creature.
So what I want is these 2 lands, 3 Dark Rituals, and Archon.
That is also...
Or Bristlebrand.
Yeah, that is also a good point too. Ritual is usually used to power out a turn 1, Entomb plus Reanimate, or Entomb plus Exhume, etc. But sometimes you just hardcast your 8 mana spells that you put in your deck, and you'd have to run pretty hot to do that in this game, but it's not impossible.
Well, yeah,
and you
either draw the 2 Dark Rituals, or you draw land and Show and Tell. Like, you can draw a lot of things. Nothing's really happening. Like, oh, it's gonna be another 1/1 this turn.
Yeah, that's true, and I do think that part of getting good at your deck or Magic in general is, thinking about all the different combinations of ways that can win you or lose you the game, because it kind of informs what you should be playing towards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not irrelevant to point out that we could potentially cast this Gristband. We are 4 mana away, which sounds like a lot.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Dark Ritual.
Unfortunately, it seems like Maxim has less faith than you do in running off Runner Ritual.
So I think the reason to unmask there is because it's one of those like Monty Hall type of things, like, oh, what card do they still have in the hand that they don't choose to play? And Glimpse of Nature is like one of the major ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely makes sense as a card that would be stuck in the hand, having not a good time to have cast it. Or it could be Natural Order, and because your opponent is getting the second Dryad Arbor, that sort of thing would be lethal soon. We see the Show and Tell. We see, unfortunately, the Dark Ritual being pitched over something else. So that we can't put Gristband into play this turn, but any additional mana source will be enough to do such a thing.
Okay, but Allosaurus Shepherd, but the claws themselves, the Gristlebrand 7/7 lifelink can make that still not necessarily be good enough. So we'll see if we can kill Mana Source.
this game is shaping up to be really close, really intense, because we have the Shepherd, but that's the only elf in play.
Yeah.
It doesn't pump all green creatures, it only pumps
That's
itself right
true.
now. And so if a Maxim can get Gristlebrand into play, it would be bigger.
Yeah, but with double Cradle, you will have lethal the next turn. But here, let's see. So that's 4 mana, 4 more mana. So that's a hoof. So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to be it. And it would have been it even if the Gristlebrand
Even
wasn't played this turn, I
yeah,
think.
I agree. I guess in theory you would have been able to pay 7 and maybe make something else happen, but it's like very difficult. You're looking at like multiple petals with show and tell again with like another fatty.
Yeah.
So hoof, there it is, and
Yeah.
Newton be able to take this one. I think they were 1-1, so you know that knocks Maxime out of the tournament, but you know still a pretty good showing, and you know these tournaments double elimination a little bit more cutthroat, maybe not. Like it depends on if you're always playing for the elimination matches or you just want to play more rounds, but still great coverage, great more rounds to have. I don't know. I think our this whole backup match thing hasn't been going particularly well, has it, Anu? So. Um, he says backup match is still on. Okay, so
To spite you in this one
yeah,
moment,
yeah, exactly.
he decides, I will have a backup match,
Yeah, it's
actually.
fine. I take all these shots at Anu when I can, so you need to get me. You know, the
There you
revenge
go.
kill sometimes.
Exactly. This
All
one
right,
is intense as well.
curses finally. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so let's take a moment to parse out this board state. So we have the curse down. This curse of, is it misfortunes?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, the curse that grabs more curses.
it,
So Luminal had.
it can't grab other curse of misfortunes, I think.
I think you're right, but Luminal has a very short window to finish off Justin here before he grabs these curses that both shrink the creatures and then kill them all. But
Okay,
he
yeah.
might have enough time, especially with the Slickerless killing one of the blockers, and Justin himself being only 5 life. I think it's going to be enough to push through here.
So one thing that's also super unfortunate is just like the overwhelming splendor. Like that's kind of like part of the combo that you try to set up. It's like overwhelming splendor with Curse of Death's Hold, so it kills everything that's not equipped. Then you can get Cruel Reality, which will eventually force them to sacrifice creatures, and that's like the full lock against the creature decks. But once the Splendor is in your hand, then it might as well be under the box.
Yeah. It has some awkward draws, to say the least, between the Chalice and Dark Rituals in your deck, and also these one of curses that you don't ever want to draw because you have no way of putting them back in. You also kind of need them to win the game. So,
well, if you think about it, sometimes that makes them a slightly more powerful mulliganing deck because then you can put the one-ofs back on the bottom. So
yeah, the London Mull really put curses on the map. You gotta say, if you're 7's marginal, you might as well just mulligan and then
exactly.
Have that.
Well, if your 7's marginal and has one of the one-ofs that you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So walk me through. So we know some of the key players here, but maybe talk about the deck, but also in the context of the Death and Taxes matchup, because I see some sideboard cards too.
Yeah, sure. So the basic core idea of what this deck is trying to do is it's kind of a prison-esque deck. You see the chalices, you see the trinispheres, and then for the win condition, it is using a unique plan of playing this 5-mana enchantment, Curse of Misfortunes, which enchants the opponent, and then at the start of each of your upkeeps, you will basically you get to pull a curse out of your deck and give it to the opponent. And so, as you mentioned earlier, it's using some of these 7 and 8 mana curses to make the opponent not be able to do anything and then win the game. Versus Death and Taxes in particular, Curse of Death's Hold is very powerful as they play a lot of X1s. And we see the Urza Saga has been adapted into the strategy as well, which makes a lot of sense. You play a lot of these artifacts kind of passively, so you're making your constructs bigger, and then it is also just a threat in and of itself if you've locked out the game in other ways.
And then in terms of sideboarding, there's Plague Engineer, which there's some creature types that end up matching pretty well for you. There's also Sphere of Annihilation, which we haven't really seen a lot of in Magic in general.
Yeah, so that's a relatively new printing. I forget exactly the effect, but I believe it's black and X, and then it enters with X charge counters. And then at the start of the next turn, I think you either destroy or exile all creatures and planeswalkers with CMC X or less. So it's kind of like a delayed wrath, which is always interesting because, in general, immediacy is good in Magic, but sometimes waiting the turn, basically having to force your opponent to spend a turn not making any relevant plays, and then you getting to untap all your mana on a clean battlefield can be relevant. So we'll see if
Right.
that comes into play. It's certainly a card I would expect to be brought in agained
Well, you only
atmosphere.
need to bring in one because you have
Because
Karn
it's a
to bring
card
the other.
target. Yeah, it is an artifact. Yes, so
Oh
that
wow,
is a nice
the
little
the
synergy.
old Chrome Mox, nothing to imprint hand.
Yeah, the deck certainly has a lot of kind of like tension with itself. Sometimes you're playing a lot of colorless cards, but you do need the mana acceleration of Chrome Mox.
Yeah, so it looks
It'll
like
be
this is
interesting to
on a
see if Justin decides to
mulligan.
keep.
Yes, so
Yeah,
it's on a mulligan, so choosing to keep, but ultimately choosing to keep the Chrome Mox for the potential of the turn 2 Karn, it looks like.
yeah, and I like this decision. The curses is best when it's doing its stuff quickly, and so I think that if your Karn is turn 3 or turn 4, it's kind of hard to protect it anyway, and so you might as well try to do your best to get it out early in the game.
hmm And against Death and Taxes, they're a very inevitable control deck type of thing, so it's just like playing Swamp on turn 1 is actually very strong. So if you end up like knowing you can play Karn on turn 2, you can actually lead on Swamp. Maybe the Chromox too. I guess that doesn't really play around Thalia, but it's kind of difficult. But um, just having enough lands to know that you're more than likely to operate against a Yori on Death and Taxes deck. So some of the starts aren't as frequent as others. Um,
Yep,
I could get
good
behind
point.
this.
It's a good point. Death and Taxes is known for having the mana denial be part of its game plan with Wasteland Import, but because of the 80 cards, kind of the math works out that a 4 of and a 60 card deck is kind of like, or sorry, a 4 of and an 80 card deck is kind of like a 3 of and a 60 card deck. Um, and so you're a little bit more insulated from the mana denial draws, but it still is important to have the basics, get your mana out in front of you. And so I like where this is going.
Yeah, and we do have ability to get turn 2 Karn due to drawing the Curse of Death's Hold. But note, there's no Curse of Death's Holds in the deck if we end up Curse of Misfortuning later.
Yeah, this
But
is. Oh,
we
sorry. Go
get to
ahead. Yeah.
Karn. Yeah, but Karn being able to shut down the Vial, tutor for this Liquid Metal Coating to start addressing the lands, and it looks like there's no creatures for Jason to play on turn 2.
Yeah, no, this was a very close decision that Justin had, where they could have, because Curse of Death's Hold is a good card in the matchup. They could have held that, waited a turn, made a construct, passed, went about their life. But they decided, getting the card down early, having the answer to this Aether Vial, and just being able to start mana, mana denying the opponent out of the game was more important. And I really like the decision. It's very aggressive, but it makes a lot of sense. And it seems to be working out well here.
Yep, so you get to play coding, and then there's this coding with Karn interaction where you get to just start offing some lands.
Yep. So for
And
those who aren't familiar, yes, the coding can turn any permanent into an artifact, and then Karn turns a non-creature artifact into a creature with CMC equal to the mana cost. And lands have 0 cost, so they just die.
yep, and then we see the Pithing Needle off of the Ursa Saga, naming Rishadan Port. So if you didn't have a 2-drop last turn and you chose to port me when I had access to all this mana, what are you going to do this turn?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really tough for Jason to come back from this, just losing a land every turn, not even playing fetch lands so that you could protect yourself from the Karn activation. I think that it's just going to be too difficult for them to get anything going with the Aether Vial turned off from the Karn passive.
Mhm. I didn't even realize that these Death and Taxes decks started playing Timeless Dragon. I wonder if they're playing like Mistveil Plains to like be able to tutor through there, or like recycle some things and then they could tutor it back up or something like
Yeah,
that.
I
Some
think that might be a Luino special. I haven't seen it in all the lists, but it is very sweet and is just like a 2-for-1 and can help you get your mana set up when you need to. And it also is an uncounterable flying threat,
Mhm.
which can be useful in some matchups.
Yeah, and it's like when you externalize it or cast it, it ends up being bigger than say like Endurance, so it can
Hmm.
tussle a little bit better than some of your other Death and Taxes cards the times you need to.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay,
it's just
so
yeah.
you
I
go.
was gonna say it's nice in your 80 card deck to have a thing that can be mana when you need it to be or threat when you need it to be, just to have that consistency.
Yeah, like if you play against a non-Source of Plowshares deck, and then you just choose to play it for 5,
Hmm.
and it's kind of funny. So by being like a 5-drop naturally, if you bring your vials to 5, and then you can like Timeless Dragon, then the next turn you can Yorion, and then reset the vial also.
Hmm. Yeah, and so I think we're kind of in. Unfortunately for Jason, we love you, but I think this is going to be officially garbage time.
It like had
There's
to
just
be
not much.
Revoker, I think.
Yeah, it has to be Revoker. I don't know if they're playing any Pithing Needles. I know some lists have like one or two Urza Sagas and then some targets to get. But I think in
I
lieu
don't
of
think
that,
so here. Yeah.
yeah, in lieu of that, I think the constructs are gonna take down the game while Luminol's unable to play to the board at all.
Hmm. I guess in theory, you could find Cathar Commando, and then the next turn be able to kill the Liquid Metal. It's just too slow against all the constructs, but
Yeah, it's just I think maybe if this lock had started 1 turn later and Luna was constantly shifting between 3 and 2 lands instead of 2 and 1.
then you can Skyclave. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, but that goes back to Justin's turn 2 decision to play out the Karn and get rid of this powerful enchantment. So it really goes to show that if you know your deck well and you put a lot of reps into it, you can perform well.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. So, was that match? I think that was a
I
match.
think so, yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so this was the Death and Taxes deck. Obviously, we weren't able to see it fire on all cylinders. Oh wait, apparently there's a game 3.
Oh, we're being told there's a game 3.
Yeah. I read the message from our producer in the producer's voice, and it was fantastic. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a game 3. Okay,
Okay,
cool.
so yeah,
So,
we have
that
a
means,
potential redemption arc.
yep. So that means Death and Taxes is going to be on the playing game 3, which changes some of the dynamics. Cards like Thalia, are you going to just play your Chromox on turn 1 because you don't want to get Thalia and stuff like that? But we see the sideboard here, so the cards that stand out to me could be like Council's Judgment. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, to be honest, there's not too much in here. I'm sure that Luinol did not build their deck with curses in mind. That being said, it does play to the board reasonably well. And so, if a big part of your plan is Karn plus Urza Saga, I think that the main board of Death and Taxes is suited well enough to deal with that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I agree with you. I like the Council Judgments. I'm not sure about anything else really. Like you could maybe Deafening Silence, but I think that that only comes up in against like a very specific set of draws, and it's not going to be good often enough to be better than whatever you're cutting.
Yeah, and then I guess for cards you can take out, you might be able to take out like Solitude against the creatureless deck or something like that. Or no,
I
I
could
guess
see
that
that.
they have Plague Engineer, but like after it resolved, like are you necessarily win the game that way? I guess you still can. So
Yeah, I think that you definitely want to keep your answers to Plague Engineer, and considering it's a 4-of, first of all, and then I've played a number of Plague Engineers in my day, not out of curses in particular, but it is good enough where it's like you just want to have an answer to it, and then you can redeploy the cards that were locked out of your hand from
mhm,
it.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to push through the card disadvantage and keep going and win the game.
Hmm. So opening hand seems to be a vial with a bunch of 2-drops against Plague Engineer, like we talked about a little bit earlier, and Sudden Edict. It's very interesting that they're playing a Sudden Edict now because that ends up playing a little bit differently with Stoneforge Mystic. You don't really want to just, pass through the turn or anything. But maybe they just end up Sudden Edicting on their main phase as a result, that way that you don't just activate it at the end of your draw step or some weird time or something.
Yeah, it definitely puts some wrinkles in. You can't even use Aether Vial to put something into play in response, and it does kind of force you to play more face up, more to the board.
Hmm.
Although I think from Justin's perspective, you're just gonna fire it off anyway because you wouldn't want to give your opponent the option to put a creature that makes a germ token into play.
Right. So like if you're thinking about like I guess some sort of leveling, it's like the only time it's ever good for you is when they're already in their end step. So they can in theory activate anytime before that. But like by giving them that option you should have just done on your turn. Like it's only good for you when they pass and don't think you have her for whatever reason. And that they gain
Exactly.
equity by having mana up.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very rare set of occurrences where waiting actually helps you, and it just gives your opponent the chance to, maybe get the extra creature into play. Because even though, Jason searched for the Sword of Fire and Ice, from the other side, you can't know if they have or don't have, another piece of equipment to put into play. So you just kind of have to play that sort of thing safe.
Yep. And then here, there's a small kicker of being able to get the Retrofitter Foundry into play too, because you have the 1 extra mana from the Ancient Tomb.
Very true.
So here, we just get all the equipment.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a really efficient use of mana. Puts multiple threats in play, puts multiple pieces of equipment in the hand. I think that there's no targeted removal, I believe, other than, I suppose there's the Hagra's Mauling, which we do see in hand. And so, but outside of that, there's not much that the Curses player could have done to target the Stoneforge, and so getting another creature in play around the Sudden Edict, I think, was very desirable.
Yeah, now it leaves us in a pretty interesting situation. So, like, your servo could be at some sort of parity against the living, like a single one of the living weapons, but maybe this is a turn that you have to develop the Plague Engineer and just, like, take your free Flicker Wisp, then, like, resign yourself to just, like, block in some cases that you'd rather not block or something.
Yeah, this is a really tough decision. I actually think that it looks like what Justin is doing is he's going to, cast this 4-mana Murder on the Stoneforge Mystic just so that Jason never has the chance to
Yes.
put into play the Cauldron, because the Cauldron does have trample, so it would push through the 1/1s that the servos pretty easily. And I like this play. I had to look up Hagra after seeing this deck was going to be in rotation today. But for those unaware, it's basically you have 4 mana to destroy a creature on one side, and you have the backside is just an ETB tap land. It's one of the dual face cards from, I believe, Syndicate Rising.
Yeah, it also costs 1 generic less if they only have non-basics.
Yeah, so it's literal murder if they have some non-basics, yeah. Or don't have any basics, I should say.
Yep, so can't make a counter with the Retrofitter Foundry yet, because you need 2 mana to be able to do that, but still, just not facing down any of the living weapon cards is really desirable right now, and here you're able to just eat the Flicker Wisp. Now you have a blocker if they choose to suit up the Spirit of the Labyrinth, so we're at some sort of parity, except we know that there's a Skyclave Apparition in hand, and then that's going to wrinkle some of the plans.
Yeah, on the board it's close, but like you said, there's the Skyclave in hand, and making the servos using the Ancient Tomb, it does kind of over time. It is a cost, and so we're going to see how that plays out potentially.
So we see an Aether Vial trick here. So on your upkeep, being able to activate here. So why is he choosing to do that?
That's a really good point. It looks like the goal here is to tick the vial up to 5 and get Yorion into the hand and into play. It is one of the nice changes specifically for Death and Taxes on the companion rule, is that it's not necessarily strictly worse to put it into your hand because you only have like 3 or 4 mana available. But an Aether Vial, you could put it into your hand and use Vial. And because Luna wants to get the Yorion into play as quick as possible, they want to tick the Vial up this turn, but they still want to use it to put the 3-mana creature into play. So they do the line that they took.
We also saw an interesting decision there between choosing a Wasteland or casting the Batterskull.
Yeah, that's true. I think that it's close because Batterskull is a powerful creature, and it can be nice to get it into play. However, it looks like Lunel has decided that restricting the opponent's mana is more important here, and I think that makes sense. It looks like they're certainly a little bit ahead on the board, and are certainly going to be ahead with the Orion into play, and so making sure your opponent can't do some big spectacular thing that puts you behind has a lot of value to it.
So we end up drawing the Mana Source, casting the Batterskull the next turn. We might see a Sudden Edict in response because they know that there's the Yorion, so if you let the living weapon trigger resolve, then they would just be able to Yorion the Batterskull, get a new germ to suit up.
Yep. You might as well do it. It's better to not give the opponent options when you don't have to, and so doing it before the germ token comes into play is smart, because if the germ is the best thing for Jason to sacrifice, he will choose to do that, and if it's not, he'll do something else, and so just don't give him a choice.
Yep. Yeah, kind of a small drawback to the Edict effect. Like, it seems very good between the split second, pretty good against cards like Merit Lage, but it definitely has its downfalls and matchups that have a little bit more creature density.
Yeah, it certainly does, and we can see that the four sideboard Plague Engineer is kind of a nod to the idea that my main deck, the way it's constructed, is not necessarily the most well suited for this matchup, and so it can be like you described, where if you're playing 1/2s that draw cards from your deck, or artifacts that create 0/0 creatures but can then be re-equipped, these certain cards will not necessarily perform the best.
Mhm. So here we see Yorion being suited up with the Sword of Fire and Ice. Now that there's no Spirit of Labyrinth in play, you're able to draw your extra card. And we kind of glossed over this a little, but Skyclave Aberration ended up just taking out some mana sources. We saw the Wasteland and just overall trying to just say, hey, you're just not welcome back in this game. Like I already have this advantage. I'm pushing it ahead. We see a Rishadan Port activation on the upkeep.
Yep, I think that Luna played this game very well. They identified what was important and kind of where their position was in the matchup. And so when they felt like they were a little bit ahead, they decided to just make sure that the opponent had the least amount of chance to come back from the game and do something powerful. And it
Mhm.
seems to have worked out, and they take the match.
Yeah, so pretty interesting. We got to see both decks do. We didn't get to watch game one, but we got to see both decks do their thing ultimately, and ended up being in the Death and Taxes players' favor. But I'm pretty sure that was a match between two 2-0 players. So in double elimination structure, we'll still be able to see the Curse of Misfortunes deck, and yeah, so pretty interesting round, and I wonder if we have results up. That way we can see who's really leading the pack here. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
we have a lot of it. So it looks
yeah.
like we have Grixis control, or no, yeah, we have Grixis control in the 3-0. We have Sneak and Show. We just saw Death and Taxes win here to be 3-0. And
And just real quick, while you're going through the results, and I am as well, I just wanted to speak real quick to, sometimes people who are hesitant to give Death and Taxes a try kind of worry about how it fares against these, decks that are trying to make 4 mana turn 1, 5 mana turn 2, and do like these incredibly powerful things before you have a chance to get on the board. But like we saw in that match, that does happen sometimes, but other times, you have the tools to stop what the opponent is doing before they get anything too powerful off. And so, if you are hesitant, have been on the fence about trying out that sort of strategy, I think this match was a good example of why you might want to give it a try.
yeah, so even though I'm known for playing, Grixis Delver style decks, Death and Taxes is actually like my favorite legacy deck. I ended up not doing it because I didn't want to buy at the time Rishadan Ports and Wastelands. I'd rather have Wastelands and Force of Wills, and I wanted to have like Power Glue type of decisions instead of like Death and Taxes like type of like decisions, and really like Port Dingo in any other deck, but Force of Will can go in other decks. But I actually have like Death and Taxes builds, and I just have never played like on Magic Online, and I've never played a league with it or anything. But I just know I like the deck so much that I just want to have the ability to play it whenever
Yeah,
I want, like whenever I
yeah.
just want to learn.
In Legacy, I definitely have a similar disposition to you. I gravitate towards the cantrip strategies, partially because it's not really something you can get in other formats. It's kind of unique to here, and it's that nice. But unlike you, I have played Death and Taxes through a few leagues,
Mm.
and I did enjoy a lot of the decision making that provided as well. So